Pipeline Industries Guild webinar. Today's session is focusing on pipeline diversions, generally to facilitate HS2. We're looking at it from a lands and environmental perspective. Both Sam Parton and Andrew Beattie, Sam's from Fisher German and Andrew's from RSK, have worked together on a variety of schemes and will be able to bring some real life experience to how they've helped to facilitate these. I know it's affecting so many parties, especially in the Midlands and lots of utility companies. So I think it's quite a good topic for everybody to listen to. We're going to run the webinar over the next 45 minutes, and the format we're going to take is Sam and Andrew are going to present. If you have any questions, please raise them via the chat function, and I will stop Sam or Andrew as they get to an appropriate point in the presentation just to ask those questions, so we can try and keep it interactive as they're presenting, and then we'll also have time for questions at the end. And we're going to trial something slightly new this time, and for anybody who would like to have the sort of additional discussion with Sam or Andrew or each other towards the end of the presentation, we'll close formally, and then if anybody wants to stay online for sort of 10 minutes at the end, we'll have a bit of discussion for those that would like to join in with that. So I'm going to start by handing over to Sam Parton, who's going to take over the screen, and I will speak to you all shortly. Sam, do you want to turn your camera and microphone on?
That definitely might help. Thanks, Rach.
No worries.
Okay, so as Rach said, we're going to talk to you today about how Fisher German and RSK work together to support clients with their land and environmental requirements when diverting their assets to facilitate HS2. Okay, so as Rach said, I'm Sam Parton. I'm an Associate Director at Fisher German. I work in the infrastructure sector and I've been working at Fisher German since 2010. I've been specialising in management and maintenance of high pressure pipelines, typically oil or fuel, but also worked in gas, electricity and fibre previously at Fisher German. And Andrew?
Hi, good afternoon everyone. My name's Andrew Beattie. I'm working with the environmental management team in the RSK group. I've been involved with the HS2 project since October 2017, but as a wider group of businesses, RSK has actually been an integral part of the delivery of HS2 since the inception of the project. Over the last 8 years, RSK has worked closely with HS2 and its supply chain to write key documentation to survey large areas of the project. And this has given us a unique insight into the bespoke requirements of the wider project. Over to you, Sam.
Okay, so I'll just talk through the agenda quickly. We'll nip on to who Fisher German and RSK are very quickly. We'll talk through the HS2 route, some key facts for HS2, the hybrid bill, undertakings and assurances, the current legal position, land requirements, how FG get involved on these schemes. And I'll hand over to Andrew and we'll talk through the environmental minimum requirements, RSK's involvement, and then I'll run through a little short case study, and then we'll do any lessons learned. And as Rach said, there'll be some questions at the end. Okay, so Fisher German, I'm sure most of you know who we are. Established in 2000 with a history going back to 1830. One of the top 15 UK property consultants in 2018. 26 UK offices now, with our newest office in Exeter. 600 staff, including 60 partners. We operate across 6 sectors, being commercial development, residential, rural, sustainable energy, and more with regards to this presentation, infrastructure services. Fisher German operate a localised approach to deliver a wide range of integrated chartered surveying, planning, consultancy and estate agency services. We've got over 10,000 active clients, including some of the ones that you can see on the screen now, such as UKPN, Cadent, CLH, Severn Trent, etc. Over to Andrew.
Okay, thanks, Sam. Some of you may be aware that RSK is a leading integrated environmental and engineering technical services business. We're actually the largest privately owned UK-based business environmental firm in the UK. The figures given there on numbers of staff and countries that operate is a little out of date, and don't consider the number of significant acquisitions that have occurred since January this year. which now means that we have over 5,000 employees now operate in Spain, Latin America, and Far East. Can you just take the next slide, please, Sam? This slide shows the diversity. Just click one more, please. Yep. So next slide demonstrates the diversity of the RSK group, and you may recognise a number of the businesses that are displayed here, many of whom have supported the current work that we're undertaking on RSK, on HS2, apologies. Okay, over to you, Sam.
Okay, so the HS2 route and HS2 generally, I think it's fair to say HS2 is a little bit like Marmite. So people either seem to love it or hate it, whether you're for and against it. HS2 is a planned new high-speed railway linking London, the Midlands, the North and Scotland, servicing over 25 stations, including 8 of Britain's 10 largest cities and connecting around 30 million people. The government said the main reasoning behind it is to provide more capacity to the existing network, cut the carbon emissions being used via road and air transport, and also provide better connectivity. This is all to help the government hit their low carbon commitment and become net zero by 2050. And they've also said that HS2 will help rebalance the UK economy. Looking at the route itself, on the screen, you've got phase 1, which is running from London to the West Mids. Phase 2A is West Mids to Crewe, and then the kind of Y section is Crewe to Manchester and West Mids to Leeds, which is phase 2B. Okay, so a few key facts, whether you're interested in going through them. HS2 Limited was established in 2009 and phase 1 announced in 2012. HS2 involves about 345 miles of new tracks. And interestingly, the UK haven't built a new railway north of London for over 120 years. Cost estimate, it's quite popular out there in the news. Initial cost estimate in 2010 was 20 billion. Current budget's about 56.6 billion. And as you may have seen, the independent analysis said it could go over 100, with 107 billion being quoted. Phase 1's due 2029 to 2033. Phase 2 is 2036 to 2040, so it's quite a way off yet. The full network would concrete an area the size of Manchester. However, 2 million trees will be planted as part of the project, and it's going to provide a 50-minute saving time between London and Manchester. Regarding the freight, they're looking to increase the freight trains by 15,000 once built, hopefully taking 1.5 million construction lorries off the road. Headline facts for HS2. Okay, so the hybrid bill, bit of the legal background. The works produce, the hybrid bill, as you can see on the screen, rather than a typical CPO or DCO application for a large infrastructure project, the government are using something called a hybrid bill. It gains royal assent through the courts. An example of a hybrid bill was the Channel Tunnel. It allows an Act of Parliament to be passed with the sole purpose of authorising a particular infrastructure project, and it grants legal and planning powers for the following: so operate and maintain, compulsory acquire interest in land, affect or change rights of way. I don't want to read them out, but they're there basically. Before being granted, obviously there's always the requirement to work with local authorities, communities, and stakeholders to develop the design of HS2. The work to produce the bill also includes an environmental impact assessment, which Andrew will know a lot more than I will about. The results of which are reported in an environmental statement submitted alongside the bill. Secretary of State has also created environmental minimum requirements, which set out the environmental and sustainability commitments that will be observed in the construction of the proposed scheme, which Andrew will discuss shortly. Sorry, guys. There we go. Okay, so undertakings and assurances. Throughout the approval process, commitments given by the promoter during the passage of the bill included in the Register of Undertakings and Assurances, and these are held by the Department of Transport and finalised by royal assent. So undertakings, they are binding agreements between the promoter and another party, and they set out in legal documents or given by another means to the Secretary of Committee itself or to Parliament. Assurances, they are unilateral written commitments made by the promoter in a letter or with a document or in a petition response. The purpose of the register is to record the commitments which have been given concerning the implementation of the project following royal assent. HS2 have about 3,000 UNAs listed on a giant list that you can download off the internet if you're really interested. They are legally binding on HS2 and all organisations doing work to facilitate HS2. So we've been quite involved in reviewing those UNAs and making sure that we're compliant throughout the works on site. And anyone can report a non-compliance, so you can report it through to HS2. So if you see any sites and you think there's a non-compliance of a UNA, you can actually report it yourself through to HS2. Okay, so the current legal position, phase 1, London to West Mids, the hybrid bill was deposited 25th of November 2013, and it was granted 23rd of Feb 2017. Construction has commenced, so a lot of the initial works have started, and they're on site at the moment. Sorry. Phase 2A, the hybrid bill was deposited 17th of July 2017, and it's not finalised yet. And phase 2B is still in its kind of planning phase. So lots of work in the background on that. Okay, looking at the land requirements. So HS2 is the largest property acquisition scheme since World War II. They've been acquiring property since 2011, and that includes some 12,000 individual land acquisition notices served, with 64,000 notices to enable survey work. Around 7.4 billion has been spent to date, with 1,200 properties being acquired across the 3 phases. HS2 have their own land processes. They call it the FLAB process, which is final land acquisition boundary. I've been quite involved in that. But in our cases with utility diversions, land is typically only needed on a temporary rather than permanent basis. So the land required for the line of the railway will itself be permanent. The land required for temporary construction sites, such as utility diversions and that kind of thing, are contained and taken under Schedule 16 of the hybrid bill. It's very, very important to include all the land that you need in your initial planning phase, because getting extra land can be quite an expensive and time-consuming exercise. Safeguarding is a key process right from the start of the scheme, and it helps to protect land from conflicting developments. So local authorities are brought in to help advise on that. Right at the start, the asset owner will submit their construction and easement land requirements, and like I just said, it's super important. We've almost found ourselves at ransom points before if we're not applying for enough land. Okay, so negotiation of utility rights is preferred, but vesting can be done if required if those negotiations fail or can't be done. And as most of you may have seen, late 2020 there was a land and property review with 36 different proposals being put forward. A couple of those, so better aftercare for landowners and faster agreements and payment of compensation, which has been a big gripe with a lot of landowners on HS2 of slow payment and that kind of thing. So they're looking to hopefully improve the speed of that, because faster payments of compensation definitely help to keep people sweet and happy. Okay, so how have FG been involved? We've been involved pre, during and post construction. So pre-construction, we act as the initial interaction between our client, the utility asset owner, landowners, stakeholders, and HS2 representatives. We ensure the initial legal requirements are met, so something called a development consent, design and construction agreement, or a protective provisions agreement. These are legal documents that ensure there's a relationship in place between HS2 and the asset owner, and the assets are protected, and there's a way to backcharge those costs to divert the asset back to HS2. It can be a very time-consuming exercise because obviously it's public funding, so every penny counts on it. Coordinating feasibility studies and route planning, like I said, that's super important at the beginning of any scheme. Ensure access is available for environmental surveys and ground investigation. So we'd serve the relevant notices on landowners through HS2. Provide planning advice, services for ground infrastructure. Like I said before, Schedule 17, that is kind of HS2's planning permission. So the hybrid bill grants what is termed as deemed planning permission, which is similar to an outline planning consent for development authorised by the bill. There's obviously a requirement to liaise with the local authority on that, but it's done through a HS2 internal procedure. Undertakings insurance assessment, as I said before, that can take quite a long time, but it's definitely worthwhile getting your head around those and understanding those to make sure that you don't have any non-compliances. Pre-condition surveys on site, getting a record of the land. Stakeholder and community engagement, and we also act as a consent manager up to the point of construction. So we've been filling out the construction readiness checklist, which is actually a really useful document, and I've actually pinched it to use on other schemes because it's such a good thorough checklist to make sure you've covered every possible issue you might find, to make sure it's ticked off and you can take access to a site without any issues arising. During, we'll always liaise with the contractor and any affected parties, and obviously the ongoing interaction between the parties. Afterwards, we'll post condition survey. We get involved in the FLAB process, which is the land process, making sure that new legal rights are in place before the land is handed back. That's kind of throughout the whole scheme, to be honest, rather than just after. And we get involved with the project completion checklist at the end to make sure everything's signed off. And then quite a lot of aftercare for the clients. They're retained clients, so it's not just a one-off project. We get involved with the protection and assurance of that asset post the works, because HS2's contractors will start on site and want to make sure that that asset's protected. So we're involved with their contractors quite a lot after the scheme as well is finished. Okay, so I'll hand that over to Andrew.
Thanks so much, Sam. I suppose you could just progress the slide a little bit.
Okay.
One more.
There you go.
Fantastic. Thanks for that. So thanks for that, Sam. Sam has introduced the hybrid bill. And within the bill, there is reference to control measures known as the environmental minimum requirements, which is captured in what we can see on the screen, and the undertakings. So those of us who are worked in similar scale projects, so Crossrail and other DCO schemes, may be familiar with how this structure. So I'm going to briefly explain the significance and development of these requirements. So prior to the requirement to the hybrid bill being granted royal assent, an environmental statement was published. An environmental statement stated that to ensure that the project's impacts, which had been assessed in the ES, have not been exceeded or would not be likely to cause a significant environmental impact, the nominated undertaker, including the utilities companies, are contractually bound to comply with the controls set out in the EMRs, designing and constructing phase 1 of high-speed 2 works. The EMRs explain the expected minimum requirements. It also contains a series of memorandums, all of which are linked to the undertakings insurances. Beneath those documents sit a whole raft of technical documents and e-papers, all of which are available on the website or HS2 website, but requires some knowledge to identify what actually is required. So what I want to do now is quickly focus on a couple of those. So we're going to focus on some items in the CSAP and then look at the UNAs. So the Code of Construction Practice. So this provides a consistent approach to managing construction activities. One example being quite prescriptive. So core working hours being 8 to 6 on weekdays, excluding bank holidays, and 8 to 3 on the Saturdays. That's fairly straightforward. Anytime you want to work outside of those hours, then you need to start looking at undertaking the section process. And then there's a little bit less prescriptive items, so and a bit more open for interpretation by site teams. So it's about site lighting. So the statement is site lighting and signage will be provided to enable safety and security of the construction sites. It will be at the minimum luminosity necessary and use low energy consumption fittings. Okay, that's great. So like I say, it's a bit less prescriptive and it's more open for interpretation. The list goes on, and you do need to know pretty much everything in here. HS2 expect you to know that. So just going through the register of undertakings insurances. So I just want to focus on assurances because there's some really specific environmental elements in there. So Sam mentioned previously they're given in letters, emails, or information papers. So the example of let's take one example about air quality. So E31 is based on air quality, in which it contains an assurance to the London Borough of Camden on construction vehicle emission standards. So you're wondering why majority of the route is going through a rural setting, but we do have to remember where it originates. It starts in London, it starts at Euston. Therefore, there has to be assurance given to London Borough of Camden. And you'll see this all. This is just, it will be replicated all the way through. So that assurance is on about emission standards from construction, all of which you need to be aware of, particularly at the bidding stage. But we're going to go into a bit more detail later on. Let's go to the next slide, if possible. So similar to the slide that Sam had up earlier on, it was talking about pre-post and construction support. So this is what we were doing to get to the CRC checklist. So Sam would be operating as the project manager. We'd be working with him and the construction teams to get ourselves ready for this construction readiness checklist. And basically this meets all the HS2 requirements, which again links back to the environmental statement and the environmental minimum requirements, but works will not exceed the impact assessed in the ES. So simply put, this could mean that are you actually working in the area that you're supposed to, and are you are you working to the right requirements? So how we're going to these links, and we all did in terms of pre-construction, so we were able to eliminate certain risks and able to hit key program dates and support overall risk reduction of the scheme. All of the items identified on the screen were delivered by the RSK group of companies in collaboration with construction contractors. We even were able to utilise our own in-house archaeological team. You can see we're doing some watching brief trial trenching on a work site with our archaeological team from ADAS. So you can just see all the other items on there that we've sort of undertaken. So a couple of ones I just want to focus on here would be ecology. So ecology surveys. Ecology surveys were undertaken as part of the environmental statement. As we say, that was published in 2013. We didn't start on site until October 2017. So there's a huge gap between that period. We all know that ecological species move around and they're not constrained to one location. So we undertook surveys because they were expired or they were never undertaken in the first place. You have to remember there was a lot of opposition to this and landowners weren't permitting access onto their site. So at some points we were doing surveys that no one had ever been to. And we also have to remember that there have the early works and the main works contractors involved. And initially, all survey work was to be completed by the early works contractor, but sometimes we were so far in advance of their works program that we basically had to undertake that work ourselves because there's little point just trying to get them, waiting for them to commence later on. So the other items that we undertook was ecological mitigation. So example being straightforward, be Great Crescent new fence design and installation, badger set closure. We actually undertook the first live dig, which was licensed with Natural England in attendance. So that's the first live dig on HS2 on one of our work sites. But it would also be very irresponsible for us to not consider the wider works. And many times we were undertaking mitigation, but not only benefited our programme, but the wider scheme. So it wasn't as straightforward as it sounds. Can I just move on, if possible, Sam? It's two photos. So just yep. So just an example of a work site. Top photo is a month apart. So here we've got an example of one of our work sites. We installed over 2 kilometres of fencing. And again, I wanted to stress that when we were designing our fencing, we had to consider the wider scheme. So we didn't want to duplicate our effort. Obviously, HS2 is publicly funded. So yeah, it's public money has been spent. So we didn't want to sort of burn through that. One unforeseen difficulty that we did encounter, and probably HS2 didn't really grasp because we were so early in the programme, was planted crops. So as you can see, the difference in those photos, month apart. Technically, as the landowners had already been compensated for the loss of crops, they weren't too bothered about what happened. So this became our issue, and we had to undertake large-scale land clearance. If we'd left that to rot in the fields, it would become a habitat feature for the species we were trying to exclude. So it's just trying to talk about maintenance and just thinking of something else that we weren't particularly prepared for at the initial stage of our work scheme. And then just moving on to the next one. So going through that checklist, we've been given approval to commence on site. So we have commenced on site. So we moved into the construction phase, and the role of the environmental manager during that phase can be fairly broad. It would be pointless to undertake all the work up front, and you can see how much work would have been undertaken without reviewing how this was progressing during the construction process. So the environmental manager's role could change radically. So it would come to more awareness raising and training, compliance monitoring, incident response, coordination, stakeholder management, general problem solving. And then this is some of that sort of always happens to the environment team. So the environment team is always picks up the too difficult to manage activities. And that could be, on this slide, we're going to be talking about the responsible sourcing materials and non-road mobile machinery. So again, with the EMRs, there is a requirement to ensure that certain products are responsibly sourced. So Sam mentioned that if you take the total amount of concrete to be used on the project, they would cover the size of Manchester. So you have to consider the embodied CO2 emissions with that. And not only to mention that the energy requirements to manufacture the product in the first place. So HS2 have set out requirements, which means that 100% of them of certain materials, and this one is steel, concrete, and timber and other materials have to come from accredited sources. So I've given you a table there. So it would be FSC, timber, PFC, concrete that's manufactured to BS 6001. Steel that's come from the 6001 or the CARES Sustainability Construction Steel Scheme. So there you go. So again, why do we bring that? It's about linking it back to EMRs, linking it back to ES. We have to think about not causing a significant environmental impact in the long-term development of this project. So the next slide is again, typically not something that you would think that an environmental manager would have to deal with, but it's about non-road mobile machineries. So I'm going to just give you a quick overview of what this is. So non-road mobile machinery is defined as any mobile machine or vehicle that has it's not solely intended for carrying passengers or goods on the road. So example there would be an excavator. It could be dumpers. It could be piling rigs. It could be generators, concrete pumps. So everything you would expect to see on a construction site has to have a minimum standard in terms of Euro rating. There is key exclusions, so items below 37 kilowatts are exempt. And then you have to remember, like, generators are a constant speed generator, so there isn't. It can only go up to stage 3B because there is no corresponding level of stage 4 and EU levels. So the one thing I wanted to impart on today is this is hot off the press. This came from the HS2 a couple of days ago. So that middle common, you can see it says a block exemptions. So previously from if you look back into the EMRs, you'll see from 2020, the 1st of January 2020, all the emission standards would have moved up to what you would see in the 2022 column. However, HS2 have undertaken independent advice from the Energy Saving Trust, and based on that, they have extended the block exemption, meaning that the stricter requirements come into force on the 1st of January 2022 rather than this year, to give the sort of the construction industry more opportunity to be prepared for this. So you can apply. You can apply for certain exemptions. A bit of feedback there. You can apply for certain exemptions. The items being listed as either on a specialist item, unforeseen for circumstances, or triviality. So in the previous slide, we saw some side booms, and we probably all know these manufacturers quite a while ago, sometimes in the 70s, and because of their specialism and the short period of time, and they're only using a specific period of time in the construction program, we were able to seek exemptions just for the side booms on our work sites. So just giving you an example of that, of how we went around the process. So if we could just take the next slide if possible, Sam. So in addition to becoming experts in non-road mobile machinery and responsibly sourcing materials, sadly, even with proper planning and briefing out to our staff, incidents occur, and this is why you do need a competent environmental manager on site. So this is items not just from HS2, but just across the whole of the construction industry, infrastructure projects to work on. So pollution prevention equipment being incorrectly used, fugitive dust from construction plant, and then this is probably the worst one, is discharge of trench water close to water courses. This all stuff that shouldn't is not permitted or not best practice. So, and that's what you'd have an environmental manager on site to inspect upon and enforce. So, just moving on to the next slide. So these are some briefing notes that we produce as part of our works. So we spoke about the information papers. All the information is quite deeply hidden within the EMR's information papers, and sometimes it can be difficult to distill that or get our site teams to understand that. So what we did was we produced these briefing notes. From left to right, it's got the on-road mobile machinery, responsibly sourcing, and on-road vehicle emissions. And that's like a 2-pager. A quick hit of what you need to know and what they need to know at that stage to comply. And then just taking that a bit further, we've got one more slide on-road vehicle emissions. So in addition to the non-road NRMM requirements, the EMRs applies to light and heavy duty vehicles. So the first EU emission regulations were introduced in around about the early 1990s. This is called Euro 1. And then since then there has been a series of Euro emission standards, with the current Euro 6 being the standard for the highest standard for diesel. That was introduced in 2014. And then these standards are designed to become tighter over time to define the tolerable limits for exhaust emissions of new vehicles. So again, this is what you need to be aware of. It's a target, but it's a requirement of HS2 that all your HGVs, all that visiting height, all your light duty vehicles are all the little white vans that you see on every construction site. They have to comply as minimum with either the Euro 6 or the Euro 4. So to help you understand, as a quick way of spotting this, there's a sort of general handy way of identifying quickly if you're compliant or not, and that's basically doing the numbers starting at the registration plates. So yeah, for Euro 6 it's 16 and up and 65 and over. That was for heavy duty vehicles, or for light duty vehicles it's 15 up or 64 and over. And then for the petrol, like light good vehicles, it's 05 or 55 and over. So just wanted to impart that information because HS2 do undertake compliance checking, and this is stuff that you need to know and you will need to be enforcing on your work site. So just move on to the final slide. So you'll be pleased to hear that we've got to the end of the construction project. Your asset is now installed in the ground or in the air. It is now live, but the role of sort of the consents manager, environmental manager, does not stop there. And there's another checklist to consider, which is the project completion checklist or closure checklist. Within there, you may have to demonstrate actual CO2 emissions from your work site, demonstrate that you complied responsibly sourcing, give ecological license returns, and basically and as part of it undertake physical restoration, which you can see on this work site. We've got core matting put down with hydro seeding on the banks. You can see it all in green. So that really comes to the end of sort of our role and involvement on the project. So I'm just going to hand over to Sam, who's going to sort of take you through the next section, who's going to do a case study, I believe. So.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. I'm on mute again. No. Okay, so a case study I thought I'd run through with yourselves. The pipeline diversion for both phase 1 and phase 2B. It was where the two lines split, basically, not too far away in the Midlands. So this was a high pressure fuel line laid in the 1970s. It was only laid at 1 metre deep, so we had to divert it to a suitable depth, with HS2 doing cut-ins through a lot of the install. They want the assets to be quite deep. So the project, we commenced legal proceedings and route planning back in 2013. That's when HS2 got in contact, first of all. The constraints included on the site we found were badger sets, which caused a bit of a headache. There was a 600 metre horizontal directional drill, which reached a depth in the bedrock of about 30 metres. And a couple of other constraints was that we had to cross under the Birmingham Paisley Canal, and we also had to cross under the M42 with that drilling 600 metre drill. There was also a large gas pipeline across the site, which caused a bit of an issue. I managed to overcome that quite well. And then challenging landowners. They weren't too bad on this scheme, but certainly some challenges along the way. Construction works commenced September 2019, and they were completed April 2020. Current status is that I'm going through the reconciliation of the costs, closing out the work orders with HS2, and also finalising the new legal rights. We're trying to get those done as quickly as possible. HS2 are at a stage now with this scheme where they want to get them negotiated and agreed, or whether to compulsory acquire the rights. The project, hopefully it'll be closed off this year. We'll come to an end with HS2 on this project this year, and it's actually 8 years after we commenced discussions with HS2. So it's been a long road for the project, but it's been pretty successful. The engineers got their drone out during the construction, as you can see on the screen. So we've got the existing pipe in green. The drill location was the red circle, and you can see the phase 1 and phase 2B, just where it splits there. We had to do that drill 600 metres to where it comes up, where all the pipes already laid out, ready to be welded and then pulled back through. It was interesting, the drillers put an X mark the spot on where they expected the drill to come up, and it came up within about 30 centimetres of that X, which is pretty accurate. And then you can see we did a bit of open cut, had to cross the gas pipeline to do an auger bore below that to connect into the existing network. Okay, so as part of the scheme, we had to do a planning condition under Schedule 17. So we teamed up with an engineering firm who quite like their technology, and they put a virtual reality video together for us so we could demonstrate to the planners, and the local authority, and everyone internally at HS2 what we were planning to do. So at each end of the pipeline, we had to put a valve compound. So like I said, we worked with this engineering firm who produced this kind of fly-through, and this accompanied the planning consent internally at HS2. And it just showed what the development we proposed would be. So there's the access track flying through there to the valve compound, and it took you through. So it gave the planning authority a good vision of what the proposal would look like, and also how it would be sheltered by existing trees and shrubs. All the trees and shrubs are as they are on the ground. And as any engineer wanted to do, they got involved and started to do some cutouts to show the pipeline, how it ran through, the lids on top, and generally gave a good feel for what we had planned for the job. So from a planning aspect, it worked really well. As you can see now, they're doing some kind of walkthrough. They also use this for training purposes for pipeline technicians, so they can teach them in the classroom how the doors work, what it looks like inside the chamber, how they can safely access and exit it. Yeah, and it's been a really useful demo to train the new line techs up. They can even take photographs on site and import them into these videos, so they can actually get the wiring and all sorts of things in within cabinets to look exactly like it is on site for a training purpose. So thought I'd just show you that because that was a really useful tool, and if anyone's is interested in that, just give me a shout and I'm more than happy to team you up with the guys that created that. Okay, so a few as-built, that's as it looks. So it's not too far off. In the video you saw a tree on the right hand side, that's that one there. And then see the valve compound and as it looked once it was built. So it wasn't really far off. So yeah, the planners were happy, and it's definitely a tool that we'll be using in future when we're having to get planning consent for these kind of things. Okay, so lessons learned. At the end of the scheme, kind of my lesson learned was I think it's absolutely vital for clients to instruct an experienced team who have previously dealt with projects with HS2. They're pretty much a beast of their own. They've got their own acronyms and terms and processes. And I think it's absolutely vital that you get the right people on board to begin with who understand all that. Because if you don't, it's a big learning curve and can cause big delays and issues and also additional costs. Like I said, ensure detailed feasibility is completed. We had quite a few feasibilities done on some projects with solely engineering input, which is fine, but in today's world, I think the land, environment and planning elements have huge implications on projects. So it's definitely worthwhile teaming up the right specialisms to get that feasibility study done nice and early in the scheme. Spend time reviewing the UNAs as a non-compliance, like I said, can be quite time consuming and costly to rectify. And I think Andrew added that one, which was ensure that the responsible sourcing and NRMM requirements are embedded, clearly identified within contractors, designers' contracts. Yeah, I think if you miss them out, Andrew will agree, it's a bit of a headache. People that don't quite understand that process.
Yeah, and there's a commercial risk to it as well. So.
Yeah. Okay, and that is everything. So just like to say thank you for listening. Are there any questions, Rach?
Thank you both. That's really interesting and really helpful to provide a case study as well, because it just puts it in the whole process into perspective. We've got a question for Andrew. Can you signpost to where the new revised information for the HS2 NRMM guidance that extends to 2022, where people can find that? You just on? Oh, yeah.
I know. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. If that person sends me their email, I can pass that email on to you, because it's come from the air quality lead and the environmental lead environmental manager within HS2 who's working for utilities. So it's I can send on the email. So. Brilliant.
Kim, if you contact you've raised a question, if you contact me, I'll put you in touch with Andrew and we can get that information across to you. I've got just a general question for you both. What would you do differently? You know, you're going to be doing loads of these schemes over the next few months and probably years. And Sam, talking about the timescales you've told us about, probably the next decade, if not more. What would you take forward, sort of as a combined approach, to make the process as smooth as possible going forward?
Sam, you're on mute.
Yeah, I think, well, like I said on the final slide, I think just making sure that you've got the right project team in place with the right consultants who have dealt with previous schemes, previous HS2 schemes and before. Like Andrew says, it's a bit of a minefield, a lot of the requirements and things that HS2 request. We found that on one of the schemes was in the contract documents, we loaded all the different documents in, the whole HS2 suite of documents, which I'm not sure it's read or not, but it created quite a bit of a headache. And like Andrew says, it's a bit of a commercial risk because you soon get uplifted POs and all sorts of things. So definitely worthwhile looking to see what work the contractors you're looking to use have done before. Yeah. Andrew, I didn't know if you wanted to add to that.
Yeah, no, likewise. I think it's spending time at the start, reviewing the UNAs and all the other documentation. Not just as the consents and environment team. It has to be a whole team approach. because there's implications to everyone. So, like I say, some of these items unfortunately do always fall to the environment consents team, but it has to be a whole team approach, or you're not going to go anywhere. So that's what my recommendation is.
Sorry, another question. Sam, one for you. James missed the part about difficult landowners or challenging landowners. In what way are they a challenge, please?
I think you're always going to get challenging landowners on projects. They were just quite difficult to allow any kind of access. HS2 had a big headache with some of them in the past, especially when holdings are being split up by the scheme or properties being taken off them. A lot of these landowners aren't really that fussed about the money. They'd rather keep the farm intact or that kind of thing. So some were absolutely fine. Some had kind of accepted it, come to terms with it. Like I said, they'd been talking to HS2 since 2011. So it wasn't kind of a new proposal we were proposing. Thankfully, I didn't work for HS2 back then, so I didn't work for HS2, but I think their lands team had a few headaches back when they first approached the landowners. So yeah, they can just make every kind of process difficult. They can be difficult before, they can be difficult with contractors on site, and they can also create a few headaches afterwards as well. Thankfully, I've done quite a lot of compensation work, but actually HS2, their internal lands team, do a lot of that. But we just need to make sure that we're taking the right records on site, just so HS2 have a full picture of how the land was previous and how it is after. So when they are going to the agents and the landowners to negotiate compensation and the loss, that process can go as smoothly as possible for them.
Yeah,
I think that really helps.
Another question. This is from Martin Jennings at Fusion. Can you highlight the coordination for the required enabling works, ecology, herds, etc.?
Sorry, can you just repeat that one?
It was, can you highlight the coordination for the required enabling works, ecology, herds, etc.? So I'm imagining they're talking about the start of the scheme when you've got loads of different people on site.
Yeah, and the herds is relating to archaeological items. So yeah, it's critical. You need to have a whole team approach, because like saying, I think sometimes there's early works contractors are working in front, or slightly behind you, and you need to be aware of where it all fits in the overall program. So yeah.
Great, thank you. What I'm going to do is I'm going to close the formal presentation and ask HQ to stop the recording shortly. So I just want to say a massive thank you to Sam and to Andrew for their presentation and taking the time out to talk to us about this. For anybody who would just like to hang on and have a chat and take yourself off mute and off and turn your camera on, we've got 10 more minutes. So for those that would like to, we'll carry on a sort of short informal session with Sam and Andrew. But thank you very much. We've got lots more events coming up. The Guild conference is next week, next Tuesday. We've got Liv Garfield, CEO of Severn Trent Water, presenting, which looks to be a really interesting agenda. And then on the 9th of February, we've got a presentation from Progressive Energy about the new HyNet scheme up in the northwest. So that will be coming out later on today. So there's lots coming forward from the Pipeline Industries Guild. So please stay tuned in and keep an eye on the website. So I'll close the presentation now, and the recording will stop. And then anybody who wants to stay on, please do, and I'll unmute you in a minute or so's time. Thank you.